and thanks for joining us here on the English Heritage Podcast. I'm Amy Matthews. This is the second episode in our special series all about the English coastline. Last time we went back to the days of the Romans. Now we're moving the story on and looking at the impact that centuries of trade, employment and migration has had on our shores. And don't forget, you can watch these episodes as well as hear them. So, if you're not already looking at us, go and find us on Spotify and the English Heritage YouTube channel. You can see some of the sites and objects we're talking about and check out what we look like if that takes your fancy. We may be used to thinking about our coastline through the lens of defence and invasion, but its bigger story lies in the ships that brought goods in and out of this island. That's things like oil, wine and ceramics from other countries, as well as the crafts and supplies travelling north and south, east to west within our borders. In fact, it's a story that predates fortification and invasion, a story that reveals the close and enduring relationship between English communities and the ocean, as well as our love of cheese. We'll get to that later on. So joining me today in the studio is the wonderful Craig Lambert. It's so nice to have you here, Craig. You are the Professor of Maritime History from the University of Southampton. How did you get into this line of work? Where did this passion point begin?
My career's quite funny, actually. I used to work in the NHS, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah,
oh
and I always had an interest in history. So I left the NHS when I was 25, went to university, probably wanted to become a school teacher. Ended up really enjoying it. I managed to get some funding to do a master's degree and then a PhD. And I just had some really wonderful lecturers that kind of got me really passionate about and sucked me into the period, which was medieval then. And I had never done medieval history before. So everything I'd read was new. It wasn't the usual route that people take through A-levels. So, it's just really got enthused by the people that taught me, really.
You've lived many lives already. This is incredible. And we also have joining us English Heritage's equally wonderful Win Scutt. How are you, Win? You're fast becoming a regular and a favourite here.
Well, nice. It's lovely to see you.
So, Win, you have selected an object for us this week. Now, I have in front of me a picture of a fragment of something much larger, I'm assuming, because I don't think this is a whole thing. It looks like it's been chipped off of something bigger. Now, I think it's a ceramic, some kind of pottery thing. And there's some lovely ridges as well, some smoother bits. Now, I've got nothing here for scale, so it could be the size of a thumbnail or the size of a bus stop. Please enlighten me. How big is this and what is this?
Well, it's about the size of a large palm.
Perfect.
And it's ceramic. It's a sherd of pottery, as we would call it.
A sherd?
A sherd. Technical language, yes. So this pot sherd is a large piece of an amphora. Now, an amphora is a Latin word for a large, usually carrot-shaped vessel. If you've ever gone into a museum in the Mediterranean, you'll see often quite a few of them, really sort of long things that stand sometimes sort of 5 or 6 feet high, and they're carrot-shaped because they're very strong and they're meant to be laid into a ship as a ship's cargo. So they're kind of stacked, but they're very robust in that shape. So they haven't got a flat bottom, that would weaken it. So this makes it very strong. So this is a sherd of a particular kind of amphora. In the jargon, it's called a B1 amphora.
So it's the sherd of an amphora. That is what I was going to say, actually. I thought as much. And it is beautiful. It's this lovely sandy colour. It's really gorgeous. And so where have we found this? This wasn't lying around on the pavement, I'm assuming.
No, this one's actually excavated from excavations at Tintagel, and over the years, there have been 3 major excavations there. First of all, back in the 1930s, when an enormous amount of pottery was recovered. And then again, some of those sites were redug in the 1990s. And just recently, we've had a major excavation there in 2017, about the size of a tennis court, which recovered about 2,000 pieces of pottery, exotic pieces of pottery. Weirdly, Tintagel, on the north coast of Cornwall, has got this incredible collection of Mediterranean amphorae and other vessels as well. It's what makes Tintagel stick out in all of British archaeology. And we're talking about a period after the Romans. So if you think of the Romans officially leaving 410 AD, This is the period of the 5th and 6th centuries AD. We used to call it the Dark Ages. To be honest, it's dark as far as documentary records are concerned. But as far as archaeology is concerned, we are uncovering an enormous amount these days. But what's amazing about Tintagel, it has more of this Mediterranean pottery than all the other archaeological sites of this period in Britain put together.
So it's clearly got a very long-standing international coastal trade. Was this a surprise? Were we aware of this before this excavation?
We were, because back in the 1930s, when Raleigh Radford first excavated it, he immediately recognised that he actually worked in the British School in Rome for a time. He knew his archaeology, he knew his Mediterranean stuff, and these amphorae aren't typical of Britain at all. They're more typical of Greece and Rome and trade in the Mediterranean. So he immediately recognised this as being really important. But ever since then, ever since he found those, we've been trying to understand why this site is a magnet for all these extraordinary artefacts coming from the Mediterranean.
And I think that's a lovely teaser for the rest of the episode. I can't wait to get into why. Obviously, England's coast has never been remote for international trade and imported goods. They've always stood for status and tastes. Is this evident in what's been excavated at Tintagel?
Well, it's just an extraordinary thing to happen, because obviously during the Roman period, nearly 400 years of Roman occupation in Britain, there is a constant trade between the continent and the island of Britain. So we're familiar with that. But there's a kind of collapse with all sorts of trading networks collapsing, probably to do with lack of government, lack of security, and a whole load of things like that. So that's why Tintagel suddenly sticks out as a sort of beacon in this rather dark ages, if you like, of history. And we've always wondered why. We've only excavated a tiny percentage of the headland at Tintagel, and if you've been there, it's just this incredible headland that sticks out into the Bristol Channel, and it's absolutely beautiful and remote. I mean, there's not really any reason for it to be on the north coast of Cornwall, a major trading port. You'd expect it on the south coast, where it can, send ships along the coast and across to France.
Craig, I mean, you're nodding enthusiastically there. Is that something you find enticing as well?
Yeah, as has just been said, the sea route is really tricky to negotiate. That because most of the southern ports would tend to trade with Brittany, your Dartmouths and your Truro's and places like that. So going round Land's End and up is very, very unusual.
We love a slightly enticing gap in knowledge on this podcast, don't we?
We do.
It's fun. It's good.
The ports are terrible along that coast. I mean, if you try to pull in on some of the rivers, there are sandbanks, which are treacherous. Tintagel is lucky in that it has a tiny harbour. But I wouldn't like to be the pilot of a ship going into there because, when the wind turns, you can get easily wrecked there. In recent times, it's been a slate port. So in the 19th century, it was exporting Delabole slate and other slate that had been quarried from along the cliffs there. So slate was coming in and being repacked and cut and then sent off around the country. That's the 19th century. So it works as a harbour. And there are some beautiful old photographs showing these ships with the gantries, the cranes and everything on the shore, lifting slate.
So it's this incredible place of mystery and story and treasure, quite literally. I can't wait to find out more about it. But Craig, I also want to ask you, obviously you've studied centuries of maritime history now, and starting off in the medieval period and then through to now. So how do you work to research this kind of material? What kind of sources are you working with?
So my original research was using Navy payrolls. So the English kings have a very bad habit of invading France on a regular basis due to dynastic struggles, I might add. And so I looked at the 14th century, but there's no Royal Navy at this time. So in order for the English king to get an army over to France, he has to requisition merchant ships, but he has to pay for those. So they produce a set of pay records, which names the ships and the shipmasters and where they come from and the size of the crew. So I was looking at naval logistics, but then I started getting interested in, well, who are these people? What do they do when they're not shipping armies over? What kind of trade are they involved in? Unfortunately, England becomes very centralised really quickly as an administrative government. So Edward I in the 1290s introduces the customs system. The real change, though, for us and the projects we've been working on over the last few years happens in 1565. Elizabeth I's government overhauls this system, basically, and brings in what are called port books. And it's a way of addressing issues around smuggling and fraud. So everything becomes a lot more standardised. The crucial difference, though, and there's two really important differences with the port books. One is that voyages are recorded for the first time. So the medieval records don't tell you where the ship's either sailed to or where it's going from, if it's an import or an export voyage. But the Elizabethan records do. That means we can geospatially map trade. The second really important point is that the Elizabethans also start to record coastal trade. It's only overseas before 1565. That's really important because when we look at the data, around 75% of all ship voyages in England are coastal.
75%?
Yeah.
Gosh.
So until we get to 1565, we're only ever really, in the medieval records, we're only really showing us about a quarter or a third of what's actually going on in the country.
People used to think that there was no place for archaeology in the medieval period. You know, right up until the 1970s, people didn't do it. I mean, Radford excavating at Tintagel was a bit of an exception. Yeah. But people thought, well, we know what's happened we've got historical records. We know what happened in the medieval period. But actually, the archaeology works really well with the history. They don't always agree. But that's one of the challenges.
That's the spicy stuff, isn't it? That's the fun. So, Craig, I wondered if you could start to tell me a little bit more about how these coastal communities were being forged by this domestic trade.
It's really interesting when you look at geography has a big impact. So I've came into this, I won't be a geographical determinist, but now I'm going to do that. But if you look at the East Coast, for example, so anywhere from Newcastle down to Colchester, what's really driving that is the coal trade. And so as London in particular expands, after the Black Death, the population kind of dips, then as it plateaus a bit, but then you get an increase in the late Elizabethan period. And London's like sucking all this produce into it. And so the Newcastle coal, I mean, at any one time you can have 1,000 ships leaving Newcastle in a year carrying coal. And so it feeds that entire East Coast system. So it involves shippers from Hull, who will then go to Newcastle, pick that up, and then maybe drop it off at Colchester. Then the people from Colchester drop it off into London. And then you've got the East Anglian grain as well, which is another key factor in Norfolk and Suffolk. And again, all feeding into that London system. And of course, one of the big, really important commodities down that East Coast is herring and fish. And so it's particularly a source of really rich protein. And then, of course, the Elizabethans bring in fish days and things like that as a way to encourage the growth of the merchant fleet. And so you're only supposed to eat fish on multiple days. And so it's a really important industry. And so if you look at kind of Kent and the southeast, that's really shaped by its connections with what is the Low Countries then. And particularly anywhere from Vlissingen up to Amsterdam. And the crossing there is short enough, so they don't necessarily want to get involved in Newcastle coal trade, because why would they? So they kind of bring a lot of produce over from there. Southampton in the middle, where I currently work, is really key, because what it straddles there is and this touches on some things that Win's been talking about, is the tin and lead trade in the southwest, which tends to be brought in principally by Cornish and Dorset shippers, who then move it into Southampton. They then pick up wine that Southampton merchants have brought in from Bordeaux and that part of France. And then the Southampton merchants will move the tin and the lead into London for the growing pewter industry. So you can see how all these things are interconnected. So the coastal networks have certain aspects of them that are focused on particular commodities. It's a bit more complicated than that, but broadly, there's a kind of key set of resources that are shipped into the big centres like Bristol, Southampton, London, Newcastle.
And as you say, it's the sheer variety, isn't it? From, as you say, coal, livestock, wine, herring. Like, that's just to name a few that you've rattled off there. Like the sheer variety is incredible. What else have we got on board?
So one of the most significant commodities is cheese. And this
now you're talking my language.
This works in multiple ways. So in the southeast, again, in particular Kent, where we've got quite a lot of documentary evidence, it's Holland cheese that comes over, and I mean tons of it. And again, when you think about it, it's a good source of fat and protein, and of course it keeps, so it's not. And when we were putting the data in for Liverpool, what we found really interesting was that there's lots of cheese coming into Liverpool, mainly from Chester, but also from Ireland as well, and butter in particular from Ireland. But obviously Cheshire has always had quite a big dairy area because of the way the landscape is. And you get ships from London turning up to Liverpool and picking cheese up and then going back, and you think about that journey because it links to Tintagel, so they're going all the way down there, round Land's End, and it's a bit of a journey, but you think to yourself, well, the commodity is obviously really important to them, and it's tons and tons of this material that goes out, and it's that Irish Sea network that kind of taps in. So Cheshire cheese has always been a thing.
I can fully empathise with travelling the breadth of the country for cheese. I can fully empathise with that. Speaking of herring as well, we had a whole episode on the herring girls and the row houses at Yarmouth, and it's fascinating. Not just the logistics and culture around the trade in these coastal towns, but also the people and the sort of socialising around it as well. Win, I wondered if you could expand a little bit on that, the kinds of communities and the kinds of people who are having their lives impacted and their culture determined by coastal trade, perhaps with a focus on English heritage properties specifically.
Yeah, well, Tintagel's the one I know best, and of course, the trade is difficult to. Our latest excavations have shown a little bit of that, but so much of the organic material that is probably being traded doesn't survive. We've got for the first clues of them making salt from seaweed, black salt, but hardly any fish bones from where we're finding. So, why aren't they eating fish? Yeah. We've got plenty of meat bones, and I think that they're either trading along the coast to bring their food in, or there's a hinterland behind Tintagel where they're growing this stuff. But lots of people think of Tintagel as an export place for tin. We've got all these it's pulling in these Mediterranean goods, so therefore it must be tin that's going out. But I think that's too easy an assumption, because we haven't actually got any evidence for tin export there at all. It's a high status site. It's a prestige site. It's probably a royal site. So there are all sorts of benefits for people trading with it. They will gain all sorts of prestige and power themselves, and they may be exporting food. Yeah. But I don't think they're necessarily exporting tin.
And do we have any examples, perhaps close to Southampton, if we're in Craig's neck of the woods? Do we have any English heritage sites around those parts?
Well, we've got places like Dartmouth Castle that protects the entrance to the River Dart, and Pendennis Castle that protects the entrance to Fowl and that part of Cornwall. And of course, we've got defensive positions all along that coast, which is all about protecting that trade, of course, but going right through to the Napoleonic and later periods. And on the Isles of Scilly, we have quite a few sites as well, like the garrison walls, but it's all about protecting the coast and protecting the coastal trade a lot of the time.
So, Craig, you mentioned there that a lot of your source material is from official records and documentation and records of taxation that came in. What can you tell us about what we get about the people behind all of these taxation records?
just to give an idea of scale, in the Elizabethan period, well, the port books, there's from 1565 till the 18th century when they start to be phased out. There's about 20,000 of these in existence. The London ones can be 1,000 folios. You can trace people's careers. You can look at how many mariners only work maybe in coastal trade, how many just working overseas, how many do a bit of both. You can look at how things change, how consumption changes. Do new things start being imported or exported? How does that impact the coastal trade? You can see how geopolitics impacts things. Of course, the English kings are also Dukes of Gascony until 1453, so they own Bordeaux. Once the French retake Bordeaux in 1453, that principal wine port is lost. So you can kind of then see how English traders move to Spanish wines in particular and things like that. So you can trace all that. What we're finding in particular is there's an increase in what you would call luxury materials. So as we move into the 16th century, we find far more looking glasses. We get a lot more combs. We have quite a large quantity of hair from Chinese women imported, which we assume is being made for wigs.
Really?
Used for wigs, sorry, yeah. We've got children's toys. We get spaghetti coming in the 18th century, yeah.
Wow.
But we can also look at, once you've got someone's name in a record, you can then maybe find a will or some probate documents. So then you can find out things about the families. What we're finding is an awful lot of women in these sources. And I must admit, my views changed significantly, because when I came into the project that we've just finished, which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, I assumed women, I knew I'd seen women before operating, say, in small centres, but I assumed that they wouldn't be working so much, say, in places like Bristol or London, where it tends to be very patriarchal, mercantile communities. But we're finding women shipping goods out on East India ships. In the 1670s, 1680s from London. We've got women operating out of Bristol, where in particular connections with Bilbao for iron. So they're bringing Spanish iron, which is really quality iron, into Bristol. Gosh. And we've got them working in Gloucester, Exeter. We've found them everywhere. So it's really changing the way that we see how these men, because traditionally women would say, oh, well, they're involved in the fishing side of things, so fixing nets, that kind of thing. But we're actually seeing them as active traders. In
trade,
yeah. Actively in big centres as well, which is really important.
And that's a really nice point to drill down into as well, in that there's going to be differences between these small ports and larger ones, the and the communities around them, the opportunities that are present, the kind of cargo coming in and out of these small versus large ports. So aside from perhaps the surprising gender balance, what are some of the other differences or textures between the small and the large ports that we see?
What we tend to find in the smaller places is that this goes back to this idea that's been developed by quite a few academics. It's called paramaritime, it's called. And the whole idea behind this is that people within these centres have maritime communities, coastal communities, have complex labour and occupational structures. Nothing's really specialised, and the maritime industry isn't really regulated until the Stuart period, so it's quite easy to come in and out of it.
I wondered if you could build me a bit of a picture as to what stayed consistent and what were some of the major changes in these communities.
I think one of the big changes is when Trinity House starts developing certificates and things, but this is more for the shipmaster class, where they want them to be a bit more professional, in inverted commas. Where you get significant amount of change is from about the 1650s, really, and it develops with England's growing maritime empire. So we do see specialisation still happens within these communities. So there will be people that only work coastal, there will be people that only work in overseas, but the overseas bit starts to become a bit more significant.
But I was curious, actually, Craig, whether there's a big separation between the ship, the crew of the ships, and the merchants. It sounded like that, whether they're a thatcher or a farmer or a brewer, that they're staying at home. They've got a nice house. They're still farming, but they recruit a crew for for the ship that they own and send it off to Amsterdam or the East Indies or wherever it might be. Is that how it works?
It can be a mixture of both, actually. So we tend to what we find is, so you can trace people's careers. So we've got a nice series of records for Faversham in Kent. There's a really nice story that we've got again with a group of people from Kent operating in Erith. This chap is called William Ferrers. So we found this will, and he owns this ship called the Trinity. And then once I had the will, we could then trace him in the other records. And he's very unusual, because what he's doing is sailing from Kent and going to Truro. And the minute I saw that in the data, I thought that's unusual, because normally no one from Kent would do that. They'd go to Southampton and bring. So what they're effectively doing is they're going from Kent to Truro with haberdashery wares of all things, and then they're bringing back tin and lead for what we think is the pewter industry. But interestingly, on his. This is quite a large ship for the time, but he owns it because we know that from his will. But he also captains it, but he also appears as a merchant on board of it. And one of the other people that seems to be linked with him all the time is a chap called Thomas Andrews. And crucially, in his will, he says that Thomas Andrews is his business partner. And he leaves, and this goes back to these family connections and how important these communities can be. He leaves Thomas Andrews, his son, £5 in his will, and he states that the son must follow divinity and not study law. So there's a stipulation. And
wow.
This chap becomes Lancelot Andrews, who becomes a really important bishop. He's the Bishop of Winchester. He becomes a really important bishop in James I and VI's reign.
So that fiver was well spent.
That fiver was well spent. And it's really interesting how, though, that when they make the wills, they always call themselves mariners, and then they'll list all the properties if this is a very wealthy. But it seems that identity comes before anything else.
It transcends the career or the job.
Yeah.
And as you say, it percolates into a sense of identity, irrespective of whether you're just doing that or your career changes. That's fascinating. That's brilliant.
It's a risky business, though, isn't it? I mean, there's piracy, there's shipwrecks and all sorts of things. I would have thought if you're a wealthy merchant and you own a ship, you're going to get a crew to do the dirty work for you and take the risks.
Yeah.
And,
was there a romance around it, though, as well? Was there a kind of culture of exoticism?
It's really interesting because we've got a shipmaster who commands one of the largest ships in Bristol in the late 16th century. The ship's called the Golden Lion. It's 350 tons, 400 tons, a really big ship. And this chap then appears in the coastal documents in command of a ship called the Helen of 5 tons, and he's moving wine. And this is the classic. What you've got there is somebody who's got the skills to command a ship that size, but he hasn't got the resources to invest in that. So what he's done is he's bought a smaller ship, and what he's doing is moving wine. So sometimes instead of taking cash wage, what they will do is take a bit of money and have some stove space, so bring a few casks of wine back with them instead in lieu of wage. And then you can see him moving these things around. So you can see how there's an elite world where someone who owns that ship is extremely wealthy, but the people that work in it, as you say, are kind of the ones that are doing the hard labour, but they still invest in that to make a little on the side.
I wondered if you could expand a little bit on some of the disruptive events of the modern age that mean that these communities aren't these thriving ports that they would have been in the times that we've discussed.
Decline's very interesting because there's always a narrative of decline, even in the periods when they're really prosperous.
Yeah.
So there's a series of surveys that the Elizabethan government does in 1565 when the poor books were introduced, and they send these clerks out, and they go there, and they're supposed to be looking into piracy and various other things. But what they do is they describe the towns or the ports, and they'll say whether some place is really busy, whether it's declining. So they go to Southampton, for example, and it's, the Italian galleys don't come to Southampton anymore, which they used to in the 15th century, and now it's a very declining place. It's really poor. It's not what it used to be. But then we look at the records and we think, well, it's not really declining. So, for example, when the colonies happen, ships will come up the English Channel from Virginia or Maryland full of tobacco. And what they do, instead of going down, because where they really want to go is London, but instead of going down Southampton water, because that's a bit of a detour, they drop lots of tobacco off at Cowes on the Isle of Wight. And then what happens is all the Southampton ships come out to Cowes, pick the tobacco up, and then they just redistribute it all out around. So you can see that Southampton merchants, yes, their overseas trade, in inverted commas, may decline, but what they're actually doing is just reacting to a changing circumstance, a changing economic circumstance. Near where I live, Hamble, for example, has gone to kind of a yachting place now. So its trade's gone, but it's been replaced by another like wealthy group of people who have got pleasure cruises and all those kinds of things. Whereas if you go to Great Yarmouth, you know, the herring fisheries really like kind of disappeared. The fishing fleet, you know, has suffered, even in places like Scarborough and Whitby. So I think different communities have different stories to tell. Hull's the same, but that's emerging as quite an important place for the wind turbine industry now. So there are periods of decline in fishing in particular, but then I think there's other ways to demonstrate that there's a bit of resilience there as well.
Yeah. As we're learning more and more about our coastal history, what insights are we revealing and grappling with in your line of work that you're really excited about? What feels new and exciting to you?
The project we've just finished, we've got about 700,000 ship voyages on a database. We're making this public at the end of June into July, freely searchable. It runs from 1400 to 1780, the dates of the ships, and we've done a lot of geospatial mapping, all the voyages and maps. So I've got a really great team behind me that kind of do all the tech aspects of this. So you can trace a boat that comes in from Portugal with oranges and lemons, and then you can follow the coastal ships as they like ripples as they re-export the oranges and lemons around the coast. And so you can kind of see how overseas trade is totally reliant on coastal trade as well. And most mariners tend to spend most of the time in and around the North Sea and English Channel. The other really important thing that we're finding is that Europe's the kind of anchor. And it's, of course, what's going on there is it's all coming from the Baltic, the grain and the timber that they need to build the ships, and Amsterdam and Rotterdam kind of reship that out. So there's a lot of continuity. The next stage for us really is to see how this operates on a European scale. So we can see records sometimes where we've got a ship which will leave, say, Plymouth and go to Bordeaux, and then we can find it coming back about a month later. But we know it's done other things on the continent that we can't see. So the next stage for us is kind of trying to tie in those wider European records so we can really see what are these people doing. So you can that's where for me anyway, that's where the kind of next stage is like reconstructing these systems at scale.
Absolutely. And I think it's so lovely as well that, I mean, a couple of words you've used there of seeing how these changes in trade ripple out, or the movement of people flow upwards. It's so lovely that this is language we use around water and around tides and the way water behaves. And the fact that there's human movement and culture and society is moving in the same way because it's so tightly tied to water and trade routes. Finally, Win, I'm going to ask you, what other new research about trade specifically is coming out in your world and your field of research?
Well, my world, I'm just amazed at the kind of detail that you can drill down to with historical records. You know, you can reach the individual people. You know, lovely hearing Craig's stories about, you know, actual named individuals and named ships and what they're doing. And you can go right down to 1 month of a voyage. Absolutely incredible. We just can't do that through archaeology, you know, so we're coming at it from a completely different angle. We're never going to be able to reconstruct that kind of detail, but we're working from almost nothing in a lot of cases. You know, when we're talking about the early medieval period, we've got 400 or 500 years of no records really at all. not of maritime trade anyway, and even beyond that. So it's incredibly difficult. So we have to base it on sherds of pottery and glass and things like that. But there's an enormous amount of data coming out. It's not written records, but it's artifacts, and that more and more of that is being published online so that people can go in there and look at comparisons between sites. And now we know how long this coastal trade goes back, and the overseas trade. For example, we've got evidence right back to the Stone Age of, in the Neolithic. We've got trade. We've got it through the Bronze Age with ships like the Bronze Age, the Dover boat from the Bronze Age surviving, and local trading vessels like the Humber vessels and things. And then we're getting more evidence of Iron Age trade with wine vessels coming in during the later Iron Age. And there's even vine leaves on coins of the Iron Age, so you get a glimpse of the trading networks with Europe. And then, of course, Roman and into the early medieval period, we're just gathering so much more archaeological evidence. It's wonderful. It's an exciting time.
It's like quilting, isn't it? We're sort of patching together all of these little bits. It's beautiful.
Exactly.
I'm going to bring our lovely conversation to a close. Craig and Win, thank you so much for being incredible conversationalists and sharing all of your expertise with me. It's been a genuinely brilliant conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been the second in our special series on our amazing coastline. Don't forget that you can watch these coastal episodes as well as hear them. If you're not looking at us already, go and find us on Spotify or the English Heritage YouTube channel. Next time on the podcast, we're arriving at the former front door of the man some people describe as the greatest actor of the 20th century, Sir Laurence Olivier, the genius of stage and screen, founder of the National Theatre. He once lived in a modest terrace in Pimlico, and an English Heritage blue plaque has just been unveiled in his honour. We'll be exploring his incredible life and legacy. Follow, review, and join us next time.